And we're live, everybody. Welcome back to Philosophy Friday, Freaky Friday. We said it would be back. It's officially back, and we're
It
gonna
is.
get freaky with Freud today. Jim has recently taught. You taught a whole course on this, right? On Freud.
No, I taught this. I taught Civilization's Discontents as part of my ethics course last semester.
Oh, got it. Okay, so all right. So you taught what we're going to be studying, and I'm excited, man. I'm going to be the student here. This is new material to me. I just started reading this delicious volume. I mean, I had like your intro to Freud in my high school psychology class. Is about as far as I've gone, which is to say, like nothing, right? So this we thought it'd be just a little bit different, a little bit fun, and for people who are like, I don't care about Sigmund Freud, stick around because you might. And as always, there will be thought that comes up here that will allow us to interpret it and engage with it through our own philosophical background. So as always, I'm sure the discussion will be wide ranging and interesting. So looking forward to this, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, and do we want to put our parents' advisory warning out there?
Oh yeah, big disclaimer coming up. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're talking about Sigmund Freud, right? And so we cannot guarantee that all topics here will be PG-13 or below. Okay, so I would hate.
So this might not be like on your family road trip. This might not be the episode.
Right.
This might not be the episode. We're serious for you.
You're out this morning driving the kids, to the homeschool craft class or something. Right?
Hit pause on this.
You might like download and listen to this later, right? Because with Freud, this things can come up, as it were.
So I mean, like this is gonna be Freaky Friday for sure.
Or it can get that way, And I think if you're gonna understand Freud, there's no like varnishing some of the things that he has to say, right?
So, yeah, no, good, man. We're here to go all the way. So that's said with a little bit of sarcasm, but seriously as well. So like we always like to, we want this podcast to be generally family friendly because people listen in the car. But when we think there might be some material that you might want to put the earmuffs on, we'll let you know, and that's the case here. So cool.
When my family, and we used to always take our family to a busker festival in Lawrence, Kansas, which is about an hour from us. And the buskers are street performers.
Yep.
And there was this one magician we'd see every year. We'd be in the middle of a show, right, which had like all the patina of like family friendly, and then would just uncork like a really lewd joke, right?
Yeah.
And he would always say, "Hey, if your kid gets that, it's not my fault."
That's good defense. That's good defense.
I remember thinking, he's kind of right about that.
I don't know, man.
It would just go over their heads, right?
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Awesome. All right. So where do we begin? I know as always,
with the Oedipus complex. It's not our fault.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, all right, give us some general background, Professor. What do we need to know coming into this volume by old Freud here?
I actually want to do a good bit of backwards. There's a Freudian slippery there. I want to do a good bit of background leading to this, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things with Freud is, of course, a lot of people of all sorts of intellectual, ideological stripes get really chippy about Freud, right? Certainly traditionally minded people are not typically fans of Freud. Certainly a lot of like scientifically driven psychologists are not fans of Freud. Okay. Partly because, many of the things he did, did not stand up empirically as much as he might have wished.
Yep.
Also, I think though, and we can talk about this, I can show you passages in the Interpretation of Dreams where he just rejects neurophysical reductionism as an explanation of human behavior, right?
Sure.
Or at least he's saying, until we have better neuroscience, it seems like we should be looking at what the meaning of these processes are and not just their physical arrangements, things like that. So so he's sort of like all parties,
he's a renegade. He's a maverick, right? So religious people don't like him. The physicalists don't like him. His own mother didn't like him.
Yeah, he was consciously rebelling against the Victorian, right? Morality of the late 19th, early 20th century. He was consciously rebelling against like the the unquestioning, scientific positivism of the late 19th, early 20th century, et cetera, et cetera. So he's, he's an equal opportunity troll, right? You might say.
Right on. Yeah.
Right now. But at the same time, to say that Freud has not affected like how all of us think and speak, would be to like really kind of like hide from the obvious, right? So
Yeah.
as soon as like somebody says something, you sit back and you scratch your beard and you say, I think dude's just trying to pick up girls. You know what I mean? You like we got that impulse from Freud. You know what I mean? Like as soon as like think of things like Freudian slip, like obviously that like we learned that from Freud. Like the fact that there's more going on in what we say and what we do.
And not only that, but I don't know if he deserves full credit for it, obviously, but the beginning of this book, as we'll talk about, starts off with a sort of religious debunking type of argument, right? A genetic analysis of religious sentiment, which on the grand scheme, Jim and I, I'm sure will disagree with it, but it's an interesting line of thought and something that's worth contemplating how much of an influence that had, right? Because it's still a common line of thought, right?
And so like I think it's certainly true. You cannot understand anything that happened in intellectual cultural criticism since the 20th century without understanding Freud, right?
Yeah.
And I would even say there's much to like learn positively from Freud. Okay.
Right. So, and let me pause there because that's such an important point. Like Gil Sohn makes this point. Is like the philosopher doesn't have the laboratory, but they had the history of philosophy. Right. And so like you can't really do like you can't be a great philosopher unless like you really try and study the history of philosophy. Right. And Freud, most people associate him with psychology, which is right, but he had major philosophical impact in the sense that, his ideas gave a certain contour to the population that followed upon him, right? So for that reason, he is absolutely worth studying, right?
Exactly. So now this book, Civilization and Its Discontents, is written in, I believe, 1929 is when Freud pens it. He does another edition of it in 1930 and puts, I think the only change he made in 1930 is the last sentence of the book that we'll talk about when we get there.
Yeah, no, he looked at it. He's like, no, this is perfect. I'm just gonna.
Well, he put like an ominous kind of elliptical ending to it in light of what's happening in the German-speaking world already in 1930.
Yeah, sure, right.
He's worried, right? And Freud himself was, within a few years, a refugee of the anti-Semitic programs. In living in London. Okay, so, but this is pretty late in Freud's career. Right? He's a pretty old guy when he writes this. He's looking back on it. Okay, and I want to contextualize this in kind of like the broader spectrum of like Freud's work. Okay.
Yes.
Because it's after a very important turning point in Freud's theory that happened in 1920. Okay.
Got it.
So I think if you ask me, if you wanted to say like what are like the classic like early works of Freud, and there's a lot of ways you could go with this, but I would say it's The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900, and another thing he wrote called 3 Essays on Sexuality from 1905. Okay. I think if you want to like, what's the early basic Freud? I think you could get it from those two books.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, using an example here, right? So in an essay that Freud wrote around 1900 called Screen Memories, Freud notices, well, so Freud he's a physician. Okay. And he's a physician at a time in the late 19th century before there was such a thing as a psychiatrist, right? It's like, this is the kind of the first, it's the emergence of the field, right? So he's a physician. He's interested in neurology, right? Like he was one of the early proponents of what was known as the neuronal theory. Right?
Yep.
Which I think is hilarious. It was a theory, right? That the neurons have something to do with this. And if you look at like the very early writings, you can see he's proposing what would basically be projects, what we would say would be like research projects in neuroscience. Okay. But then eventually what's happening is, patients with, seemingly unphysically grounded illnesses are being sent to Freud. Okay. So people who are having like strange physical symptoms that no one can find anything that's actually physically wrong with these people.
Yeah, brain fever, as they used to call it.
Exactly. So mostly, like, they're mostly women, and they're being sent to Freud, and Freud, is like, I don't know, I'll talk to him, right? All right, and he notices as he speaks to them, and he's uncovering certain things. He's catching them in weird slips, right? He's catching them like making jokes that seem to say a lot, but they're not really consciously aware of what they're saying in their own jokes.
Yeah, right.
And as he brings these things to the fore for these patients, they start to get better, some of them. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like this aha, like in the clinic, maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that is not in the forefront of our consciousness, right?
Rock and roll.
And
yeah.
He's already reading people, like a good German speaker, like Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer, that have this sense of an unconscious, that's going on, in the human organism, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so in the interpretation of dreams, what he does towards the end, and then other essays around that time. Well, so the essay Screen Memories, he's encountering people in the clinic. His colleagues are encountering people in the clinic that have found this weird quirk that a lot of the people that they're meeting, their very first memory, right, is something utterly trivial. Like if we say, think back to your very first childhood memory, a lot of times what they're finding is the memory is like, it's odd. It's like
just playing with or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
or like a famous example from Freud's paper is he had this, I think it was actually a colleague of his, had this patient whose first memory was just a bowl of ice cubes on a dining room table. Okay. And Freud, this is an important thing for Freud. He's like, well, if the mind or the body expends the energy in forming a memory, there must be some reason for the expenditure. Like he thinks like the kind of the organism is basically efficient. So if there's energy being put in maintaining a memory and recalling a memory, it must be doing something.
It's got to be something there, right?
Something there, yeah. But why would it be that people's first memories are, trivial, right? It seems odd to expend the energy on that. Okay. So you start questioning these patients and start questioning their families. And in this case, it's found out that, well, actually, that this guy is remembering the table setting at the dinner for grandma's funeral. Okay, that happened when he was like 3. Okay.
Sure.
Now keep in mind, it's like a 19th century European funeral. So you got like the table setting here, and the other side of the dining room is grandma's corpse. Right?
Yeah, right.
So it's like this completely displacing, utterly, like scary thing for a little kid.
Yeah.
Right? And so what's going on there is there's a conscious memory, ice cubes, right? That is actually screening for a deeper thing that is remembered, but he doesn't want to admit.
Yes, right.
See what I mean?
Yep.
So now you have this distinction between like what's going on in the conscious mind and other things going on unconsciously, and they don't always seem to like square terribly well.
Yes, right? Got it.
Another example from Screen Memories is, I think this is actually a patient of Freud's, of this guy whose first PG-13 alert. Okay, so his first memory is being out picking flowers with a certain little girl, picking flowers and then going in the house and eating bread, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Turns out like this probably never happened. Okay. He knew the girl, but the families don't really line up such that they would have been together on that day doing this. Okay.
Right.
He questions the guy, and eventually like what he finds out is like this guy, wanted as a teenager to marry that girl. He wanted to, as it were, pick her flowers. Right? Deflowering, right?
Yep.
But his dad said no, right? Because he needed to move to the city and get a more respectable profession and make better money and be a good like upstanding bourgeois, Austrian, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what's going on here is this guy like literally like kind of regrets his whole life path, right? But he can't admit that to himself, right? So what does he have? He has a memory of an event that doesn't happen that works as a metaphor for the life that he really wanted.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. And of course now, and then like when Freud brings this to his patient, like voila, right? The neuroses seem to be relieved to some degree by this revelation.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Good.
All right, so you can see then, and then he then this gets him into dreams. He starts looking at dreams. He starts looking at jokes. He starts looking at like slips of language, et cetera, et cetera. And he's finding a similar dynamic here, right? And so what he ends up doing is he distinguishes between what he calls the primary process and the secondary process, right?
Yep.
And basically, on Freud's view, is the primary process, like the basic like psychical energy that like is running all of our lives, is a desire for pleasure. Like relief from pain, relief from tension, a desire for pleasure. Okay? Yep. The easiest way to get that, says Freud, would be just to fantasize.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just live in a dream world, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the problem though is, that doesn't work out terribly well.
Yeah. Reality presses itself upon you.
So he says, in addition to a pleasure principle that's driving us, he says there must be, as you literally put it, a reality principle, right? That like says the outside world gets a vote in what's going to be pleasurable. Yeah. So now, like, you can't just live by fantasy. Okay? You have to live according to reality. Okay. Now, for Freud, the energy of those fantasies is still in there. There's still stuff you wanted to do that reality won't let you have.
Yeah. Yeah. Darn it.
Darn it. Damn it. I wanted to pick them flowers, baby. Right? Right. Okay. And so now you have this is where the term repression comes from. Like, some of these things are repressed. Yeah. Freud, they're going to come out though. They're going to come out in dreams. They're going to come out in slips. They're going to come out in jokes, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally.
Right? All right. And so in the early work, Freud, believes that every dream, every joke is an expression of a repressed wish.
Yeah, right. Without remainder. Yeah.
Without remainder. And early on, he puts his foot down. He's like, you give me a dream, you give me a few weeks on the couch, and I will come to the repressed wish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like, what about nightmares? He's like, bring the nightmares, man. I will come to the repressed wish on this. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to put that aside for a second. Okay. The other major piece from early Freud, this is now going more to like the 3 essays on sexuality, is Freud notices, and I think we all have to admit this is true, right? Just using hunger as an example. All right. The way I put it to my students when I teach this is like, okay, so why do we have an obesity problem? Right. And of course, like there's bad food in the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But also it's because the hunger drive doesn't really care what satisfies it. As long as it gets something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you could like satisfy the hunger drive on that lovely bowl of steel cut oatmeals and egg whites, right? Or you could satisfy it on the Egg McMuffin, right? Either way, the drive gets what it wants, right? So it's like, it's neutral with respect to its object.
Yeah.
Right. And Freud notes too, famously, so is the sex drive, right? It's neutral with this, like, it can be satisfied on all sorts of things, right? So then Freud thinks there need be an explanation as to why do the drives get oriented in one particular direction for the most part.
Yes, right.
So basically, like in the 3 essays, he's trying to explain why heterosexuality is the dominant way of satisfying the drive, right?
Right.
Now, for our purposes, it's important to see here, like whatever we think about all that is like for Freud, and I think this is an important insight, is drives are neutral to how they're satisfied as long as they're satisfied.
Sure. Right.
All right. Now, fast forward 1920. Okay. Freud has been seeing war veterans, right, after the First World War, right, in his clinic. And he's finding that these guys are having dreams and they're having flashbacks that are so horrific, so traumatizing, right, that he cannot explain them in terms of the pleasure principle.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's like, I try as I might, I cannot find a wish in this thing, man. Like it seems like this is just simply the worst thing that ever happened to these dudes. And their psyche forces them to repeat it every night.
They just can't shake it. Yeah.
Can't shake it. Right. Okay. And so he's like, so it seems like now he can't say every dream is the expression of a pleasurable wish. Right. Okay. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So what he ends up saying is he thinks, and there's other things that lead him to this, right? Some clinical things, some things he saw with his own grandchildren and stuff, that he comes to the conclusion that there's actually 2 drives. There's what he calls eros. There's a love drive. There's a desire for pleasure. And then there's what he other people have used the term thanatos for it. Okay. Freud doesn't use that term, right? But he just calls it the death drive. Okay.
Yeah.
And he says there's also a drive that seems that in us that doesn't just want pleasure, but also just wants to sort of like constantly like sow mayhem, right? That just simply wants to undo things and like will take us back to our worst moments.
Yes.
Simply because it wants to undo, right?
Mm-hmm,
It thinks there's two drives. There's the desire to like put things together, like think of sexual metaphor. There's a desire implicit.
Take them apart. Yeah.
Take them apart. Yeah. And then for Freud in the later work, this becomes like the human condition, right? That we're like trying to mediate between these two drives.
Yes. Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. And yeah, good. And he actually appeals to a lot of classical Greeks on that too, because you can find that, right?
Yeah, it's not like too far of a radical departure from stuff that's been said before, but good. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then in 1923, I want to say 21 maybe, he writes a book called Group Psychology and the Formation of the Ego. All right, which is the first time now Freud's moved from talking about the psychology of individuals to now talking about like psychology at a level of like what we would call sociology today.
Yes.
Right? What's moving cultures, what's moving civilizations, what are moving larger group dynamics, right? So the theory is getting applied not just clinically, but now culturally, politically, maybe.
Collectively, yeah.
Collectively, right? And then in 1927, he writes Future of Illusion, which is his, great critique of religion.
Okay? Yep.
And now it was interesting for Freud. Freud, I think somewhere actually called that his worst book, right? Like he wasn't happy with it, right? And that's partly why he's writing Civilization and Discontent just 2 years later. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the important thing though in Future of Illusion is Freud defines illusion not as something that's false, but something that we have the wrong relationship to. Right.
Yes.
He might not even say wrong because he actually thinks there are good illusions. Right. It's something that we believe not based on evidential grounds, but because it satisfies some need of ours. Right? And for him, the ultimate illusion in that sense is religion. Okay? Yeah. Now I have to be careful with that book though, because like Freud's, he's a good old fashioned Enlightenment demythologizer, right?
Yep.
Disenchanter, right? He's a good, man of science of the Victorian era, right? But at the same time, he's not like, oh, hey man, people are going to quit believing in religion and that'll be great. Right. Yeah. Like, oh, wait, it seems like civilization presupposed this illusion. Right. And so now look out. Right. Like, look out. Like this was the thing that kind of kept the id in check.
It's the glue.
The glue is going to come undone. And he's like, look out. Okay.
Yep. Right.
So, let's see. So that takes us to Civilization of Discontents. Like that's the moment that Freud's writing in there. Okay.
Good. Awesome. Yeah. Really helpful.
Questions on that or anything?
I mean, look, man, clear as mud. No, really good. Like I said, I'm a student here. I'm largely unfamiliar. I mean, all that sounded vaguely familiar. Jogged my memory in a few ways, but yeah, man, let's get. So I guess our plan here is we'll probably do.
You didn't have to borrow $80K for that,
and I didn't have to borrow $80K for that, which is always great. So
not a good
day. So our plan here is to maybe cover the first two chapters, give an overview. Let's, as always, when we do these series, and gentle listeners, if you haven't joined us for these before, we've done all of Plato's Republic. So like this stuff lives on, and I think it was all very good. So go take advantage of that. Grab Plato's Republic, go through a series on that. We did Aristotle's Ethics, do that. So we recommend, hey, grab the book and read it and really take advantage of what we're doing here. So, and thank you, Jim, for leading us through this. I always learn a ton of this stuff, man. Like when we did Plato's Republic, man, I was studying Gerson at that time, and then getting your take, and it just totally revolution. I thought I knew Plato pretty well before that, but now I look at him completely differently. So this, but with Freud, I don't know Freud, so this is new for me. So that was a helpful introduction, helpful background. So why don't we get into the book then, Professor?
Cool.
Good, yeah.
All right. So, title Civilization of Discontents, right? Interesting title already, right? Because he's gonna talk about civilization, obviously, but he's gonna talk about what's leading people to be discontented in civilization. Right.
Yep.
And I
Rock
think
and roll.
the titles has interesting and intended ambiguity. Like on one hand, remember this is like, still early-ish 20th century, right? He's in this 1929. So you have a lot of, kind of the 19th century romanticism hangover there. Like there was a golden age before humans were troubled by civilization, like the kind of Rousseauian, German romantic vision, right? Freud will have nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that, right? And then on the other hand, I think what he's saying too is we are all to some degree discontented by civilization, and that's the fundamental human problem.
Right. Rock and roll. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now he begins chapter 1 with he refers to an objection to future of illusion that was sent to him by a buddy of his who was Roland is his name. He was a famous French, I believe, it was poet. Okay. And Roland objects to Freud's critique of religion in Future of Illusion by saying, like, well, wait, man, you never really dealt with religious experience. Like you dealt with, like, very obliquely and quickly, natural theology. Like he just gives it kind of a hand wave dismissal, right?
As some of these dudes tend to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, but I think in fairness to Freud, I think at that point he's saying, like, for my audience, I don't need more than that, right?
Sure.
He's like kind of preaching to a choir there.
Yeah. Preaching to all these Humeans out there, right?
Yeah, just like a good Victorian gent doesn't go in for that sort of thing, right? Right. Let's not be
dude, like that. I mean, that's still so around today. I mean, like if you read, it's the exact same type of thing that Alex Rosenberg does in his awful little book. What is that? The Atheist Guide to Reality, right? Yeah. Which is like not like totally dissimilar in style to this, right? It's. I told you, like, as I started reading this, I'm like, Jim, this book is like deliciously arrogant, right? It's like some dude who's got like his Tumblr of old granddad. He's like, sit down, kids. Let me spin the narrative here for you.
Let me talk.
Yeah, and same thing. Like Rosenberg is like, he's like, this is the Atheist Guide to Reality because atheism is clearly true. If you've got arguments for God, then you just haven't read Hume, and he just sort of just like does that, right?
In fairness to Freud, this comes up in both Future of Illusion and Civilization Discontents. Is he basically said, but he explicitly says it doesn't matter even if you have a successful natural theology, because he's saying his view is that's not what binds at least the average Joe to religion. Right?
Yes, right, and that's clearly right. That's clearly true, exactly. Right? Yeah, the average Joe has not spent 15 years studying Leibniz's great his gonads, right?
It's funny. It's funny. Like gonads is a good phrase.
You like that? You like that?
Right? No, like, and suddenly comes this revelation. Aha! I can answer Bill Rowe on this, and therefore I'm a theist, or I'm committed now. Right? No, and so like Freud. So I think I know Freud would say that religion could be an illusion, and there could be a successful natural theology. Right?
Sure,
because that's just not how it's civilizationally operated. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think for Freud, so he just doesn't really care about. I think. Well, obviously, I think he doesn't think the metaphysical case is successful, but he doesn't care. Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought, right? Like, could there be like a disconnect between that? I know we're going to get into his little genetic story here in a minute, but. Like, obviously, I think the natural theology is relevant, right? Because, like, what's going on metaphysically in the background will tell you whether this genetic story, even if it is true, should serve as a sort of debunking story or not, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little naive to think that I would argue that it's, like, totally irrelevant, because that would itself provide an interpretation of this genetic analysis where if there isn't a successful natural theology, you might think that this genetic analysis actually does provide a sufficient, like, debunking story. Whereas if there is good reasons to think the theism is true, you could totally go in for the genetic analysis, but you don't have to think that it's a debunking analysis at the same time, right? Yeah.
And I'm not sure that Freud actually intends it as a debunking analysis. I think he thinks that's been done, right?
Sure, right.
Yeah. Like for him, he's trying to diagnose what he thinks is a coming post-religious cultural predicament,
That's good. So that's a good distinction. So he already thinks, look, the debunking has been done, and I'm just giving an analysis. That's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think he thinks that the debunking doesn't really make a difference because it's not, in his view, and I think this is true though, like it's not as though the average Joe's relationship to religion is rationally grounded.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
or the relationship against religion. I'm actually of the mind
yeah.
that arguments ultimately do very little in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, I think there, like you and I and Freud agree,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Right. Yeah, sorry,
Roland,
we're getting a little bit ahead. Let's go. Let's
this is
rewind the tape a bit. Yeah.
no, this is absolutely essential. I think
Yeah.
it's essential, right? So Roland objects by saying, no, yeah, Freud, you're right. The average schmo, right, is not into Leibniz.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, God bless him. But what actually holds him to religion isn't just like cultural conditioning. It's more likely what Roland calls this oceanic feeling.
Yeah,
Right?
the oceanic
Yeah,
connection,
this
right?
sense of I'm connected with the whole. I'm connected with something greater than I am. I'm connected with a greater power, right? And so Roland, and this is very late 19th century, early 20th century, but even now, like people, and not without warrant, will say that, whatever the arguments say, there's this encounter I have, always with a sense, maybe, or important peak moments, with something greater than me, right?
The sensus divinitatis, some have called this,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
And so Freud takes the objection seriously. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, I think what's important here. Okay, so but also it's a weird place to begin the book, isn't it? Right? Because like he's already written a book on this, right?
Yes.
And he's not claiming to write another book on religion, whatever his dissatisfaction was with his other book on religion, right? It's like, this makes more sense as an appendix than it does as the opening salvo in this book.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? But I think what Freud is up to here is he is providing a very important methodological clue as to what's going to go on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Mm-hmm.
Right. So what he does, the way he replies to Roland, is he says, well, look, there are moments in child development, right,
mm-hmm.
where one has this sense of there's no distinction between the external world and me.
Right. There's just unity. Yeah.
It's just unity. And for Freud, this is what he calls primary narcissism, right? Where there's no sense of a defined self vis-a-vis the world because no one's told you no about anything yet, right? Like when you cry, mom picks you up, right? When you're hungry, mom, puts you on the breast, right? If your nappy is itchy, someone comes and changes it, whatever, right? Okay, we were all there, right? And so Freud thinks at that point there's no distinctive egoic self, right? It's not until dad comes in and says, no, damn it, get out of mom's lap, you're creeping me out, and go outside and play, right? Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
When dad says, that's my woman, not yours, kid.
Yeah, right.
Freud, that's the birth of the self, right? And that's what he means with the Oedipus complex. Is prior to that, there's this narcissistic need for union, right? And then someone comes along and says, no, the world isn't yours, including
reality imposes itself, right?
Itself. Okay, so what Freud does with the oceanic feeling is he says that this is sort of like a hangover from an earlier point of childhood development.
Yes.
Right? Now, and
this is primordial residue. Right?
Yeah. And then it's sustained, right? But then he goes into like he spends so damn much time on it in that chapter, that silly example about Rome, right?
And the city, man. Yeah, he started to lose me there. I'm like, all analogies limp, but this one is like,
but once again, like if he spends that much energy on it, like what's he really doing? So the analogy, as he says, like, so in a real city, what goes on is like, as the city develops, we knock down the old buildings, you put the new buildings on top of them.
New stuff in place, right? Yeah.
Okay. But he said to understand the psyche, and understand the psyche as a city. And I think he is thinking about Plato here, because how does Plato explain the psyche? He explains it in terms of a city and the parts of a city, right? But he says to think of the psyche as, on an analogy with the city, we'd have to say, no, the new buildings are built alongside the old buildings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for Freud, in the psyche, the new and the old are always there together.
Yeah. The old stuff never goes away.
It never goes away, right?
It's always there. Mm-hmm.
It was there. Okay. And so the way what I think what Freud is doing here in chapter 1 is he's putting kind of his flag down and saying, look, this is not the way he would put it, but this is the way I'll put it for him, is the problem with humans is that we are running like now 21st century software on like 500,000 BC hardware.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. Like we're trying to run the new on top of the old.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Which, like you can maybe like, run, run that software. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's going to get you by, but you're going to get glitches and bugs and crashes when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is what the book is about, right? The book is about like living up to the fact that in Freud's view now, we are in our personal lives, right? Like running adult software on childhood hardware, but also civilizationally, we're running 20th century, 21st century software on 500,000 BC.
So it's a double issue, both on the individual and collective level.
Yeah. Okay. And think of it. Think of the contrast here with like Aristotle's Politics.
Yeah.
Look at Aristotle's Politics. Book 1, right? What do you get? What is humanity? It's the talking animal, right? Why? Because what's humanity? It's the political animal. Why? Because it's the talking animal, right?
Yep.
And then you get like a deduction of the structure of society right out of that. Okay. Because for Aristotle, he doesn't think the human species has a history as a species, right? It's always been here. It's eternal, right? Like all the species. Yeah. So you're running 4th century, software on 4th century hardware, right?
Yes.
And do you know what I mean? And like right now, we'd be running 21st century hardware or software on 21st century hardware, right? Because there's no change in the software, right?
Right.
Okay. Whereas Freud's saying, no, we know better now. We know that humanity has a history as a species.
Yeah.
And we know that there's been software changes and we have to live with them. And like for him, the big software innovation is civilization.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So yeah, I mean, it's, and I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I don't even pretend to be one. But I mean, there are some just like very interesting things, that I would be curious, and maybe some of the answers to this, Jim, like how much of the things that Freud asserts or claims are still held with at least some degree of entertainment in the contemporary fields versus how many have been completely disregarded, right? Like it's an interesting idea at one point where he says, well, look, no matter how old something is in our mind, it's always there. And then he kind of says two things, because on one hand he says, well, we could always get at it in principle, but in practice there might be reasons why we actually can't. So he kind of takes away with one hand what he put out with another. So he kind of like theoretically protects himself from falsification at the same time. You know what I mean? So like, well, that's a little convenient, right? But those are interesting thoughts, right? So be curious to have your thoughts on those thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, though, Freud, I mean, what Freud thought was in the old hardware, right? That's certainly like a disputed question, right? Right. Okay.
Yeah, totally.
And I think like even a lot of, not all of them, but even a lot of contemporary Freudians will say, yeah, I went a little too far with the Oedipus thing, right? It doesn't seem you can always uncover that, right? Et cetera, right? But that you have a hardware software mismatch, right? I think that's like the presupposition of a lot of contemporary psychology.
Sure. Yeah.
I think of the entire evolutionary psychology movement, right? Is trying to figure out like what was the original hardware and how do we get our current software and can we like fit those together, right? I mean, think of like, what is it, and help yourself to be or not to be a fan of this guy, but like Brett Weinstein, right? What is he and his I forget his wife's name, wrote that book on like the hunter-gatherer's guide to the 21st century, right? Well, what are they doing? They're talking about the mismatch between contemporary society and like the original like human nervous system, the way it's been set up, right?
Sure.
Okay. So I think like the problem that Freud diagnoses here, I think, is like the problem of much of contemporary psychology, right? Okay. What Freud thinks are the particular dynamics that are in that original package. I mean, that's a matter of like empirical dispute at best.
Got it. Yeah. Good. Okay. So what else from chapter
By
one?
the way, if I can like full disclosure here, for me, like, who's right? Chapter 1 of Aristotle's Politics, chapter 1 of Freud's Civilization of Discontents. That's the question for me, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Like that is the question. Like, are we running new software and outdated hardware, or is that very distinction misguided, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's like the question. I don't really have a pretty good answer to. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's an interesting question, right? I guess, I mean, so much of that will come down to larger questions. This is where you can't really easily disentangle things, like one's philosophy of nature, right?
Totally.
Is Freud an essentialist? I don't know. It sounds like he's operating with some essentialist assumptions, whether he knows it or not, but they would seem to be in tension with some of the other things that he's saying as well, right?
Right.
All right, food for thought. All right, what else from chapter 1 or chapter 2?
That probably does in chapter 1. So let's have a look at chapter 2.
Good. Yeah. All right. And we'll assign to the gentle listeners like 2 to 3 chapters at a time.
Yeah.
We expect you guys to keep up, do your homework, all that good stuff. Right.
Yeah. So chapter 2, like Freud kind of, I mean, I think of chapter 1 as like, it's a methodological, right, in a veiled way, right?
Yeah.
And then chapter 2, he's going to get down to business to kind of like taxonomizing, what he thinks the situation is, right? And he starts out like very typical Freudian move, like just talking about how much life sucks, right? Like these, right, very attuned to the darker side of things.
Yep.
And he says, like, basically humans have come up with 3 ways of dealing with this, right? He calls, on the one hand, first you have what he calls powerful deflections. Then you've got, I think he calls them substitutive satisfactions, and then there's intoxication, right?
Yeah, right.
And exactly. There's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or And so in Freud, like, he's like, I think, I mean, of course, he enjoyed his cocaine, right? But I mean, once again, it was kind of standard practice. But he's like, a good glass of wine is helpful, for conversation. But let's face it, like, getting drunk is not going to solve the problem and only make it worse, right?
Yeah.
And then he talks about powerful deflections and substitutive satisfactions. And what he means by powerful deflections is a very important Freudian concept, right? So basically, like, he would say, so like, let's say like, Pat, right? You're going to like work hard on playing guitar today, right?
Yeah.
Because
I am
really, really hard on that. Right. And like what Freud looks at that and he says, what's going on there is, so here's Pat, he's pleasure principle driven, right? He's like eros driven. He's death drive driven, like any human animal. Right.
Yeah.
But civilization has happened. He's got to play ball with civilization because to not play ball with civilization is to cease. Right. So he's got to do it. But what do you do with that energy? Like, what do you do with that sexual, violent energy that's still there? Play guitar, man. Right. Play guitar. Right. Get it out there. Right.
Right.
And now Freud thinks this is what he calls sublimation. And he thinks this is like the greatest piece of technology that's ever been come up with. Right. Is because he thinks all the great things that happen in civilization, right? The art, the music, the science, all this stuff, is that energy has been deflected from its original object, which would have been
channeled elsewhere.
Yeah. So remember, the object and the drive can come apart. And Freud's like, that's good, because if we all did the eros thing and the death thing with everything we wanted to, we wouldn't have civilization.
We wouldn't get anywhere, right?
Yeah. So happily we can deflect the energy off its original object and put on a new one. And he's like, everything good that happens comes from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Simple, clean theory. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And now what he means by substitutive satisfactions, that's where he's talking about art in the sense of like, distraction, like escapist art. And he's talking about religion, right? As he sees those as strategies of dealing with the burden of civilization, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so that's pretty much the chapter. He just lays out the options for us. But his point though is none of these really does the job 100%, right? Like there's still part of Pat that still would rather not have the guitar.
Yep.
Would rather be doing what he really wants to be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still like residual repressed energy in there.
Of course, yeah.
And so Freud thinks inevitably we will be at some level discontent with civilization.
Right? Got it. Good. Awesome. Yes. Super helpful. Super interesting. Jim, maybe we take a question or two. If there's a question or two, we can pull that up. In the meantime, is there a this is the one I got. I got the if people can see this. This is the version that has the introduction from Christopher Hitchens. Oh, you're using that one too. Yeah. So if people, I guess this would be fine. It had a fun looking cover and it was cheap on Amazon. So if people want to just go ahead and grab that one, I guess that would be just fine then, right? Yep. Good. All right, let's take a question or two and then say goodbye. Let's see what we got. All right. Thanks for the comments and stuff, everyone. Always good to see all of you. There's a question on Kim's philosophy of mind, but maybe we'll swing back to that. Sure. Let's see here. All right, here's Floyd wants to know whether Freud's discontent could be read as a secularized version of Kierkegaard's spiritual despair. Are we repressing our drives or denying our transparent self before God, or both? That's a question.
Well, I mean, I think Freud would answer that one way, and Kierkegaard would answer the other way, right? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this would be, where that, the wider questions,
the wider
obviously
considerations.
Yeah.
Though Kierkegaard is in many ways interestingly discontented with modern civilization too. So.
Yeah. I mean, like this is a lot that depend whether you take a secular or religious perspective. Like you can agree on a lot of the general starting points, right? This idea of discontent. I mean, that's Augustine, right? Yeah, he thinks our heart is restless until it rests in thee, O Lord, right? So like no religious person, I think, would disagree with the idea of just this general agitation, the soul's upward yearning, blah, blah, blah. Freud just has a different analysis on that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. What else what are you teaching this semester, Jim, by the way?
I've got our intro class, right? And I've got philosophical psychology and I've got philosophy of religion. So I've got two intros and then one of each of the other ones.
Awesome. Floyd has another comment here. He says, on the psychoanalysis side of things, may I suggest Peter Rollins as a potential guest? His work focuses on a kind of Hegelian, Lacanian psychoanalysis of religion and is a fellow at GCAS. Oh, so he's with GCAS. Where we are. I'm not familiar with his work, but
I've not met Peter, but I will see if I can track him down. We have.
Yeah. We haven't had a guest. With the two of us in a while. So we get back to that at some point. All right, let's see if we got one more here. All right, let's just take Marples. He wants to know how Jaegwon Kim's philosophy of mind developed over the years. Is he still a physicalist? Or he says, was he still a physicalist when he died? So totally not related, but why not?
Yep. The last time I really checked in with Kim was physicalism or something near enough. And what is that, man? That's like 2005?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, 2006. So I don't know where he went in the intervening nearly 20 years there, right? Because he died fairly recently. At that point, I mean, if I remember right, like he's basically kind of coming in for like an epiphenomenalist thing, which is like that's near enough physicalism, right? So I don't know that he had some major change at the end, right? But that's more because I just didn't keep up with that kind of analytic philosophy of mind stuff.
Yeah. You already wrote the grand narrative on that.
Yeah, right. Let's see. I thought Brendan had one here. Long-suffering fan of the show, Brendan Sheehan.
He's a long-suffering fan.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, Brendan. Appreciate you.
I might have just a soft spot because I named one of my kids Brendan, right?
Yeah. No. Oh, he just wants to know what was the text we were exploring. Yeah, we're doing civilization and its discontents. I don't know if there was another question there or not, but yes, yeah, good to know the book that we're taking.
But actually, okay, when just above that, he has, LOL. The ego means you're grown up. The ego means you are less narcissistic. Yes, actually, that's it. I mean, so. When people use that word narcissist today, I think I'm not gonna say they misuse it because word use is complicated, right? But like they use it differently than Freud uses it, right? So like we tend to say like narcissist, we think of as selfish, right? Or like overly obsessed with their own ego, right? Well, for Freud, a narcissist is someone who doesn't have a stable sense of themselves, right? And that's why they have to interpret the whole world as like within them, right?
Yeah.
So yes, like the more egoic you are for Freud, actually, the more grown up you are and the less narcissistic you are, right?
Yeah. Groovy. All right. Hey, before we close, sorry, Jim, did you have something else you want to add?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Before we close out, what are you doing this upcoming week? What are you working on? Anything cool, interesting?
Well, I got to go back and start teaching again.
That's cool.
I got book manuscript I'm sending off for someone to have a look at, but other than that, then I got to go back to the real world and teach.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we plan to keep this series going, right, Professor? So Fridays good. Should we?
Yeah, I think Fridays are mostly going to be good.
For that. All right. So, gentle listeners, be sure to stay on the lookout because Freaky Friday is making a mighty return, and we're kicking it this year off with Freud. So always fun, always enjoyable. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, comment, share, tickle that algorithm for us. Head over to the Substack, both our Substacks. We encourage Jim to put something new up on his here soon. Mine's rocking. I'm still cranking out stuff over there. So if you want more of the goods, head over to Substack. We'll catch all you cool cats later. Peace.